7-10 As late as the time of Samuel, unfaithful Israel experienced harassment from the Moabites. 1-12. 9-11. During reigns of Saul, David, and Solomon. Difficulties with the Moabites continued for years afterward. Israel's first king, Saul, victoriously warred against them. 1-14. 47 Since the Moabites would therefore have regarded Saul as an enemy, understandably the king of Moab was agreeable to having the parents of David, the man whom Saul had outlawed, dwell at Mizpah in Moab. 1-22. 3-4. Later, when David himself ruled as king, there also was warfare between Israel and Moab. The Moabites were completely subdued and were made to pay tribute to David. Apparently at the end of the conflict 2/3 of Moab's fighting men were put to death. It seems that David had them lie down on the ground in a row and then measured this row to determine the 2/3 to be put to death and the 1/3 to be preserved alive. 2-8. 2-11, 12. 1-18. 2-11 Possibly in the course of the same conflict, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada struck down the 2 sons of Ariel of Moab. 2-23. 20. 1-11. 22 David's decisive victory over the Moabites was a fulfillment of Balaam's prophetic words uttered over 400 years earlier. A star will certainly step forth out of Jacob, and a scepter will indeed rise out of Israel. And he will certainly break apart the temples of Moab's head and the cranium of all the sons of tumult of war. New 24. 17 Also apparently with reference to this victory, the psalmist spoke of God's regarding Moab as his washing pot. PS 60. 8. 108. 9. David's son Solomon, however, disregarded God's law and married Moabite women who had not become worshippers of Jehovah. To please them, Solomon built a high place to their god Chemosh. Not until some 3 centuries later, during Josiah's reign, was this high place made unfit for worship. 1-11. 1-7. 2-23. 13. Until the Judean exile. Sometime after the secession of Israel from Judah, the Moabites appear to have regained territory in of the Arnon. On the black basalt stele known as the Moabite stone, Moab's king Mesha speaks of Israel's king Omri as taking possession of the region of Medeba. Since the Tableland of Medeba was in the territory of Reuben Jos 13. 15, 16, Israel had apparently lost this area to the Moabites so that Omri later had to recapture it. Evidently Moab remained under Israelite control during the reigns of Kings Omri and Ahab. But following the death of Ahab, Moab's king Mesha, who paid to the king of Israel 100,000 otex to execute Muritra Longo, Moab 421 like blood to the Moabites. Wrongly concluding that the allied armies had slaughtered one another, the Moabites abandoned all caution and came to the Israelite camp, only to be put to flight. As the battle progressed, Moabite cities were ruined, good tracts of land were filled with stones, trees were cut down, and springs were stopped up. When King Mesha found himself penned up in the city of Kir-Hareseth with the battle going against him, he, with 700 men, unsuccessfully tried to break through to the king of Edom. Finally he took his firstborn son and offered him up as a burnt sacrifice upon the wall. For this or some other reason there came to be great indignation against Israel and the siege was abandoned. 2-3. 6-27. As this humiliating defeat did not take place on foreign soil but brought devastation to the land of Moab, reasonably a considerable period of time would have been required for recovery. So it seems likely that it was at an earlier date during Jehoshaphat's reign that Moab combined with the forces of Ammon and the mountainous region of Seir to attack Judah. By Jehovah's intervention the 3 armies turned on one another and destroyed themselves. 2-20. 1-22-24 Some scholars believe that this event is alluded to at Psalm 83. 4-9. Compare 2-20. 14 with PS 83. Sup. In subsequent years enmity continued between Moab and Israel. After the death of the prophet Elisha, marauding bands of Moabites regularly invaded Israel. 2-13. 20 About 2 centuries later, in Joachim's time, similar Moabite bands contributed to the ruin of Judah during its final years. 2-24. 2. With the destruction of Jerusalem in 607 BCE, Jews sought refuge in Moab, returning to Judah when Gedaliah was appointed governor. J 40. 11, 12. After the exile. After an Israelite remnant returned from Babylonian exile in 537 BCE, some married Moabite wives. But at Ezra's admonition they dismissed these wives and their children. Ez 9. 1, 2. 10. 10, 11. 44 years later Nehemiah found a similar situation. Many Israelites had taken Moabite wives. Ne 13. 1-3, 23. Moab in prophecy. In harmony with its long history of opposition to Israel, Moab is mentioned among the hard-set enemies of Jehovah's people. Compare Isra 11. 14. Condemned for approaching Israel and for pride and haughtiness, Moab was finally to become a desolation like Sodom. Zep 2. 8-11. See also Job 48. 29. Already at the close of the 9th century BCE, Amos wrote that Moab would suffer calamity for burning the bones of the king of Edom for lime. Am 2. 1-3. While some take this to mean the 2 Kings 3. 26, 27 refers to King Mesha's offering up, not his own son, but the firstborn of the king of Edom. This is an unlikely inference. One Jewish tradition, though, does link the event mentioned by Amos with the war waged against Mesha, and claims that sometime after this conflict the Moabites dug up the bones of the king of Edom and then burned them for lime. But the Bible record provides no basis for determining the time involved. Isaiah chapters 15, 16, apparently around the time of King Ahaz's death, and while Assyria dominated in the 8th century BCE, refer to one Moabite city after another as being in line for calamity. He concluded with the words, "And now Jehovah has spoken, saying, within 3 years, according to the years of a hired laborer, the glory of Moab must also be disgraced with much commotion of every sort, and those who remain over will be a trifling few, not mighty." Isra 16. 14. From historical records, the fulfillment of the prophecies of Isaiah and Amos cannot be placed precisely in the stream of time. However, there is evidence that Moab did come under the Assyrian yoke. Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III mentions Salamanu of Moab among those paying tribute to him. Sennacherib claims to have received tribute from Kamuzanadbi, the king of Moab. And Assyrian monarchs Esarhaddon and Otextoiakute Longo. Modia 422. Archaeological confirmation of the desolation of Moab, the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible observes. Archaeological exploration has shown that Moab was largely depopulated from ca. the beginning of the 6th century, and in many sites from ca. the 8th century. From the 6th century on, nomads wandered through the land until political and economic factors made a sedentary life possible again in the last centuries BC. Edited by G. A. Buttrick, 1962, Volume 3, p. 418. Compares 25. 8-11. Later, in fulfillment of Jeremiah 48. 47, Cyrus, the conqueror of Babylon, likely permitted Moabite exiles to return to their homeland. The accurate fulfillment of the prophecies concerning Moab cannot be denied. Centuries ago the Moabites ceased to exist as a people. J 48. 42. Today what are considered to have been such Moabite cities as Nebo, Heshbon, Aroer, Beth-Gamel, and Baal-Meon are represented by ruins. Many other places are now unknown. The sole explanation for the disappearance of the Moabites as a people is provided by the Bible. Note of the 1959 edition of the Encyclopaedia Britannica Volume 15, p. 629. Israel remained a great power while Moab disappeared. It is true that Moab was continuously hard-pressed by desert hordes. The exposed condition of the land is emphasized by the chains of ruined forts and castles which even the Romans were compelled to construct. But the explanation is to be found within Israel itself, and especially in the work of the prophets. In view of the disappearance of the Moabites as a people, the inclusion of Moab at Daniel 11. 41 among nations in the time of the end 11. 40 is logically to be regarded in a figurative sense. The Moabites evidently refer to some of those that the king of the north does not succeed in bringing under his control. For information on the Moabite stone, see Meshano. 2. Modium a middle dot dia possibly, appointed time seasonal festival. Meeting of Jah. A priestly paternal house of which Piltai was the head in the days of Joachim. NE 12. 17. It has been suggested that Modia is a variation of the name Mahdia, and that Modia is the same person as the priest Mahdia who accompanied Zerubbabel to Jerusalem after the Babylonian exile. NE 12. 5. Modesty. An awareness of one's limitations. Also chastity or personal purity. The Hebrew root verbs na is rendered be modest in Micah 6. 8. Its only occurrence. The related adjectives nu modest occurs in Proverbs 11. 2, where it is contrasted with presumptuousness. Although some modern scholars believe that the sense of this root is be cautious, careful, judicious, many take it to mean be modest. For example, the Hebrew and English lexicon of the Old Testament by Brown, Driver, and Briggs, 1980, p. 857 says that the root conveys the idea of one who is retiring, modest, or humble. Modesty is a translation of the Greek eidos. 1t2. 9 do is used in a moral sense expresses the thought of reverence, or respect for the feeling or opinion of others or for one's own conscience, and so expresses shame, self-respect, a sense of honor, sobriety, and moderation. A Greek-English lexicon by H. Little and R. Scott, revised by H. Jones, Oxford, 1968, p. 36, comparing do's with the more common Greek word for shame skiani. 1 Co 1. 27. PHP 3. 19. Lexicographer Richard Trench says that do's is the nobler word, and implies the nobler motive. In it is involved an innate moral repugnance to the doing of a dishonorable act, which moral repugnance scarcely or not at all exists in the ski-ne. He states that do's would always restrain a good man from an unworthy act, while ski-ne might sometimes restrain a bad one. Synonyms of the New Testament, London, 1961, pages 64, 65. Thus, the conscience is especially involved in the restraining effect implied in do's. Before God. With regard to modesty, in no textui acute miritra longo, modesty 423 in what to boast. Boastfulness is the opposite of modesty. The rule is, may a stranger, and not your own mouth, praise you. May a foreigner, and not your own lips, do so. PR 27. 2 Jehovah's own words are, let not the wise man brag about himself because of his wisdom, and let not the mighty man brag about himself because of his mightiness. Let not the rich man brag about himself because of his riches. But let the one bragging about himself brag about himself because of this very thing, the having of insight and the having of knowledge of me, that I am Jehovah, the one exercising loving kindness, justice and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I do take delight. J 9. 23, 24. Compare PR 12. 9. 16. 18, 19. God's regard for modest ones. The Apostle Paul shows God's regard for the modest ones, and also cites his own conduct in the congregation as exemplary of such modest attitude. He wrote to the Christians at Corinth, for you behold his calling of you, brothers, that not many wise in a fleshly way were called, not many powerful, not many of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world, that he might put the wise men to shame. And God chose the weak things of the world, that he might put the strong things to shame. And God chose the ignoble things of the world and the things looked down upon, the things that are not, that he might bring to nothing the things that are, in order that no flesh might boast in the sight of God. Just as it is written, he that boasts, let him boast in Jehovah. And so I, when I came to you, brothers, did not come with an extravagance of speech or of wisdom declaring the sacred secret of God to you. For I decided not to know anything among you except Jesus Christ, and him impaled. And I came to you in weakness and in fear and with much trembling. And my speech and what I preached were not with persuasive words of wisdom, but with a demonstration of spirit and power, that your faith might be, not in men's wisdom, but in God's power. 1 Co 1. 26. 2. 5. Do not go beyond the things written. Later in his letter Paul emphasized the need for modesty on the part of all, just as he himself had displayed modesty, a proper evaluation of himself. The Corinthians had fallen into the trap of boasting in certain men, such as Apollos, and even in Paul himself. Paul corrected them, telling them that they were fleshly, not spiritual, in doing this, and said, "Now, brothers, these things I have transferred so as to apply to myself and Apollos for your good, that in our case you may learn the rule. Do not go beyond the things that are written, that is, do not go beyond the limits that the scriptures set for humans in their attitude toward one another and toward themselves, in order that you may not be puffed up individually in favor of the one against the other. For who makes you to differ from another? Indeed, what do you have that you did not receive? If, now, you did indeed receive it, why do you boast as though you did not receive it? Keeping this in mind will prevent haughtiness and boastfulness in regard to oneself or another as to family descent, race, color or nationality, physical beauty, ability, knowledge, mental brilliance, and so forth." 1 Cor 4. 6, 7. Jesus Christ's example. Jesus Christ is the finest example of modesty. He told his disciples that he could not do a single thing of his own initiative, but only what he beheld the Father doing, and that his Father is greater than he is. Job 5. 19, 30. 14. 28. Jesus refused to accept titles not due him. When a ruler called him good teacher, Jesus replied, "Why do you call me good? Nobody is good, except one, God." Luke 18. 18, 19. And he told his disciples that as slaves to Jehovah they should not feel puffed up, either over things accomplished in God's service or because of their worth to God. Rather, they should have the attitude, when they had done all o textoi acute mirica longo, Malada 424 shocking to decency, to the moral susceptibilities of the congregation, causing offense to some. This counsel as to dress would shed further light on Jehovah's attitude toward the proper view and use of other material possessions that a Christian may have. See humility. Malada mo middle dot lidar from a root meaning give birth. Become father to. Ba. One of the cities in southern Judah allotted to Simeon. Malada remained in the hands of this tribe at least down till David's reign. Jos 15. 21, 26. 19. 1, 2. 1 ch 4. 24, 28, 31. After the exile, Judeans resettled the site. NE 11. 25, 26. The site of Malada has not been identified with any certainty. Melech Molech from a root meaning reign as king or king, but with the vowels abosheth, shame, to denote abhorrence. A deity particularly associated with the Ammonites 1 K 11. 5, 7, 33. Possibly the same as Moloch 7. 43. Compare Am 5. 26 and Milcom. 1 K 11. 5, 33 at Jeremiah 32. 35. Melech is referred to in parallel with Baal, suggesting, if not an identification, at least some connection between the two. Numerous authorities regard Melech as a title rather than the name of a specific deity, and therefore, the thought has been advanced that the designation Melech may have been applied to more than one god. It is generally agreed that the Malcham referred to 2 Samuel 12. 30 and 1 Chronicles 20. 2 is the idol image of the Ammonite god Milcom, or Melech, although the Hebrew term could be rendered their king. Compare KJ. As. Earlier in the biblical account the Ammonite king is referred to by his name, Nun 2 10. 1-4. Hence, it is reasonable to conclude that the name, Nun rather than Melcham would have appeared in the scriptural record if the king rather than the idol were intended. Also, it is thought unlikely that a king would have worn a crown weighing about 34 kilograms 92 pounds t. For the same reason it has been suggested that David placed Malcham's crown on his head only temporarily, perhaps to denote his victory over the false god. According to the reading of the Targum, which has been adopted by numerous translators, the crown had only one precious jewel. This has given rise to the view that it was the precious jewel, rather than the crown itself, that came to be on David's head. Child sacrifice to Molech. God's law to Israel prescribed the death penalty for anyone, even an alien resident, who would give his offspring to Molech. The 22-5 Nonetheless, apostate Israelites, both in the kingdom of Judah and in the 10-tribe kingdom, passed their offspring through the fire. 2 Kai 17. 18. As 23. 4, 36-39. Their passing through the fire to Molech has been regarded by some as signifying a purification ritual by means of which children were devoted or dedicated to Molech. Others understand this to mean actual sacrificing. That the Canaanites and apostate Israelites did sacrifice their children, there can be no question. The 31. PS 106. 38 King Ahaz of Judah proceeded to burn up his son's son, seeing in the fire. 2 Ch 28. 3 The parallel passage, 2 Kings 16. 3, reads, even his own son he made pass through the fire. This indicates that passing through the fire is at least sometimes synonymous with sacrificing. Likely, however, the worship of Molech was not always and everywhere the same. For example, King Solomon, under the influence of his foreign wives, built high places to Molech and other deities, but not until the time of Ahaz is mention made of child sacrifice. 1 Kai 11. 7, 8 Undoubtedly, if this abhorrent practice had existed earlier, it would have been denounced along with the other forms of idolatry existing during the reigns of the various kings. For this reason some commentators favor the view that the expression to pass through the fire originally applied to a purification ritual and later came to signify actual sacrifice. The passing to Molech mentioned in the O Textoi Acute Muritra Longo, Molten c. 425. The view has been advanced that the Molech to whom children were sacrificed had the form of a man but the head of a bull. The image is said to have been heated red hot and the children cast into its outstretched arms, thus to fall into the flaming furnace below. This conception is largely based on the description of the Carthaginian Kronos or Moloch given by the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus of the 1st century BCE. Diodorus of Sicily, XX, 14, 4-6. Regarding the practice of astrology in connection with worship of Molech, see astrologers. Mole rat heb. Choled. A rodent measuring 15 to 30 centimeters 6 to 12 inches in length. The mole rat Spalaxerantpashi resembles a short-legged, tailless, and neckless cylindrical lump of soft, thick fur, generally a yellowish grey-brown color. The head is recognizable by the furless muzzle and 2 pairs of large protruding teeth. Under the law, the mole rat was unclean for food. Law 11. 29. Although numerous translations render Cho-led as Weaslas, KJ-RS, there is a basis for preferring mole rat. In Arabic, a language related to Hebrew, a very similar word, kald, means mole rat. Also, Choled may be related to a post-biblical Hebrew term signifying dig or hollow out. This would harmonize with the mole rat's characteristic digging. Mole rats live underground and dig subterranean sleeping quarters and large storage chambers. These creatures subsist on vegetable matter, primarily on roots and bulbs. Thus they differ from true moles, which feed on insects and earthworms and are not considered native to Palestine. Moled from a root meaning give birth. Become father to. Ba. A man of Judah and descendant of Hezron through Dramiel. Moled was the son of Abishai by his wife Abiel. 1 Ch 2. 4, 5, 9, 25-29. Moloch. C. Molech. Molten C. Copper C.